Hey, welcome to Let's Unravel, and I'm your friend Christina. So, hot take. The Polar Express is a creepy movie, and we have just normalized it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll let you know my thoughts at the end of this episode. So, thanks for stopping by. Whether you're a new listener or a friend of the show, I just wanted to say welcome. So, how are you doing today? After all, today is Christmas. Merry Christmas, everybody. Okay, so maybe you thought there wasn't going to be a new episode of Let's Unravel. I want to let you know we are here, and I've got an exciting episode for you today. I know I've said that in past episodes, but this is an exciting episode. So if you happen to be listening on YouTube, maybe you're listening or watching on YouTube, make sure you're pressing that subscribe button to stay connected with your Let's Unravel community. And if you're enjoying this episode, make sure you're hitting that like button so we can boost our algorithm to send this episode out to more new listeners. If you happen to be listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, make sure you are pressing that follow button so you can stay up to date on all new episodes because you are not going to want to miss a thing. Now, let's not forget, we do have an amazing Let's Unravel community, so make sure you're connecting with us on Instagram and TikTok at Let's Unravel Pod. And if you want to be part of the amazing Facebook entourage, make sure you're heading over to Facebook at Let's Unravel Podcast. We have tons of exciting things over there as well. So without any further ado, let's move into our favorite topic here at Let's Unravel, win of the week. So our win this week, guys, it's Christmas. The win is Christmas. All right, I just wanted to say Merry Christmas, our win of the week, it's Christmas. If I haven't said Christmas at least 50 times within the first 30 seconds, I'll say it one more time. Merry Christmas. All right, so I just wanted to let you know that the heart behind Let's Unravel, because I've said it many times, but I will continue to say it. But the heart behind Let's Unravel is I wanted to be very intentional in making sure that there was a new episode every single week. Not just because of wanting to have consistency. I wanted to be really intentional right around this holiday season about making sure that we had episodes on these holidays, because I'll let you all know that sometimes these holiday seasons can be really hard for people, whether it's having lost loved ones, or maybe you're not able to be with your friends or your family members, or maybe it's an instance where you're single and it makes it really hard because you're holding out hope for the day that you get to have your own family and start new traditions that way too. And a lot of times it seems kind of silly to be like, well, it's just the podcast. How important can it be? But I could tell you from firsthand experience that especially on holidays when you're used to having new episodes of your favorite podcast or your comfort show, and it's like all of a sudden the holidays come around and it's like everything is on hiatus, everyone's taking a break, to still have a new episode, it brings comfort, it brings relief. So in this instance, I want you to know this episode is really special, especially for those of you that are single. Maybe you have to go to your family members and you have to see all of your siblings, whether married and have kids, maybe it's the cousin dynamic, whatever your family dynamic is, where it's like you're seeing lots of maybe happy people living in the phase of life that maybe you want to be in, but you're not necessarily in. I want you all to know everything can change in just a blip. And that, believe it or not, yes, that was a Marvel reference, but believe it or not, that actually has to do with our topic of the week today. So without any further ado, let's move into our topic of the week. So what are we unraveling today? Let's unravel one moment. So before we step into the backstory of how I got to this whole title episode of One Moment, I do want to say this episode is for everybody. So even though in my opening remarks, I mentioned how this is a great episode if you're single and you're waiting for kind of like life to change, or you're waiting for almost like that feeling like life to start, even though your life starts now. What I'm about to talk about is really for anybody in any season of life. So this isn't just for singles. This isn't just for people that aren't content with where they're at. This is genuinely for anybody. So if you are feeling like you're not being seen, I want to let you know, I see you. I get it. I've been there before. And so stepping into the story behind One Moment, it's a little over a month from when my birthday was. My birthday was November 24th, so obviously it's December 25th. And you know what's funny is on December 26th, so tomorrow will mark 6 months of Let's Unravel, which is absolutely crazy to me. And it's also crazy to believe that we are almost at 500 downloads. So downloads is in reference to how many times episodes have been played, which is really exciting. But to move back into the concept, like I said, of One Moment, on my birthday, so about a month ago, someone had asked me how I felt about being 29. They had asked, do you have any dreams or goals for this year? And it's funny how sometimes those questions, they can kind of stick with you and they kind of linger. I don't know about you, but a lot of times what happens to me is not only will the question linger with me, but what my answer will be also lingers with me. So I remember in that moment when someone had asked me that question, and I had kind of been having this feeling over and over and over again, and I finally had the words to describe it. And I said, you know what? I really don't have any regrets in my life. At this point in time, I don't have any regrets. And it's not because I hadn't had regrets prior. Trust me, I'm a person. I've had regrets prior. But what had happened is in this past year, I've made peace with a lot of those things. So maybe if I had initially regretted not going to college, I had made peace with my choices a long time ago on certain matters. So by the time I'm sitting on the couch and I'm 29 years old and I'm thinking about it and I'm like, you know what? I've made peace with a lot of the places in my life where I had regrets. At this point in time, I don't have regrets. I'm living my life in such a way where I don't want to have regrets. And the reason why I got to lean so much into that was I looked at this person and I had said, you know, if there's one thing I've learned, and I've learned this the hard way, is that everything in life can change in one moment. And that is why I called this episode One Moment. This, if there was one thing, if I could travel back in time and I could tell my 20-year-old self there was one thing, this would be the one thing. I would just look at younger Christina and I would say, whatever that fear is, whatever that anxiety, whatever the nerves are, whatever that anticipation is for that next chapter. And it's not the anticipation like, ooh, I'm so excited, but more of that like drowning anticipation, the drowning that feels so suffocating. I would tell her in one moment, everything can change. And I've seen this firsthand, whether it was graduating high school, wondering, where am I going to go from here? Right now, I'm a high school student. Where am I going to transition into? So in one moment, I'm in uncertainty. And in the next moment, I have complete certainty because that's how quickly everything changes. I've gone from being unemployed to being employed, and in the matter of a day, my life has completely changed. I've gone from being financially broke to being financially secure, all in the course of a day. And even my other absolute favorite thing is when you think about love. You know, I think about rom-coms. I think about the really popular rom-com, Anybody But You, with Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell. And I just think it's so funny how even in that movie, where all of a sudden Sydney Sweeney's character, she is in a coffee shop and she goes from not knowing who Glenn Powell's character is to all of a sudden in that moment, she knows who Glenn Powell's character is. And that is life, where in one moment you don't know someone and in the next moment, that is the greatest love of your life. And I think that is what the most beautiful part in this whole concept is how you go from one moment of uncertainty and you go to the next moment where there is certainty. And what's always so interesting is when you get to the moment of certainty, you look back at the moment of uncertainty and you're like, man, I wish I did that better. I wish I wasn't so concerned. I wish I was more gracious. I wish I was more hopeful. Ultimately. And you know, some people are going to think it's kind of silly and some people are going to think, you know what, this is so mundane. Like everybody should know this. And I get that. But you know what? You're right. It sounds absolutely silly. It sounds absolutely ridiculous. But to experience it and to get the peace from it, that is the thing that I hope for all of you. Because as much and as simple as even like, you know, you think about simple things in life where you're like 2 + 2 = 4. But until you're in that moment and it's up to you to solve that, 2 + 2 = 4, it doesn't seem so mundane. It seems like this is the problem that's right in front of you and you have to address it. And so this is a moment in my life where, like I said, I have been in the moments of uncertainty where I just constantly am thinking, how is this all going to play together? How is everything going to be all right? A perfect example of a story I have is when I was in my early 20s. I had finished working in retail. I didn't want to be in retail anymore. I wanted to move into more, I wanted to move more into a career. And so I had applied for a couple different jobs. One of the jobs happened to be an accounting firm. Hadn't heard anything back from that job. And I finally was like, you know what? I can't keep waiting around to see if I potentially got just an interview. So I was like, you know what? I need money. I need to know I'm going to be financially secure. I found out that there was an opportunity at a bank. So I had gone to this bank under the impression of applying for one job, sat down with HR, and HR ended up really liking me, and they were trying to convince me to go full-time in a completely different direction. They wanted me to be a bank teller. And I remember sitting there and being like, I do not want to be a bank teller, probably because I had seen a bunch of news articles recently about how banks were getting like held up at gunpoint. And I was like, I do not want to do that. So it was funny. I was talking to HR. They really liked me. They're like, you know what? We'll consider you for both positions. I'm like, okay, great. And I left. So I get a phone call a couple days later and they wanted to extend the bank teller position to me. And I remember thinking in the moment, being like, you know what? I really wanted that job at that accounting firm. But unfortunately, I was in this moment of uncertainty where I'm like, you know what? But that job's not being offered to me and I need a job. And I was at the point where I was like, I need money and I need to start working as soon as I possibly can. And so all of a sudden I was like, all right, I found myself saying yes. So I'm saying yes to this job opportunity. And the HR person was going on vacation. So I wasn't even going to be starting for like a full week or so. So I accepted the job and I got off the phone. And you know, when it's like you get off the phone and you're just like, man, like there's just dread. And then that was the biggest thing I remember feeling is I'm like, just like sitting down on my couch, just thinking like, oh God, like I don't want to work at it wasn't even really a bank. It was a credit union. And I just remember thinking, oh God, I don't want to work at a credit union. Like there has to be a better like alternative. There has to be more out there for me. You know, here I went from this moment of uncertainty to almost certainty where I'm like, oh, I'm in a job that I haven't even started yet, but I already kind of hate it, which is the worst. And then all of a sudden, I'm going through my emails and all of a sudden I see this email from this accounting firm. Meanwhile, so let me clear up the time frame on this really quick, where I had applied to work at this bank in May of, I don't remember the year, but it was in May. And when I had applied to work at this accounting firm, I had applied in March. So I hadn't heard anything. So obviously, you know, all of April goes by and I'm like, oh, they didn't pick me. And like, I kind of had to let it go. And even though I was going through the cycle of applying to other places, this bank teller position was really the only one that was the most credible at that point, the only one I had gotten called back for, and I even got a job offer for. So when all of a sudden I open up my email and I get an email from this accounting firm and they say, are you still interested in this position? It was amazing. The timestamp of this email was just about like an hour after I had gotten the call from that bank teller position. So I remember reading that email and I'm like, oh my God, this accounting firm pays way more. They have better hours and I got to work fully remote. So I didn't even have to go in. Whereas for the bank teller position, I would have had to work on site and the hours wouldn't have been flexible. I would have had to work weekends and just all these different things. So finally, I end up emailing back HR and I'm like, yes, I'm available. Like, what else do I need to go through? And basically, HR was like, oh no, if you're still available, here's the offer. This is what we're going to do for you. If you're interested, say yes. And I was like, oh my God, yes. Like, absolutely yes. So I called the bank back, ended up letting them know I had gotten another opportunity to go in the different direction. And so we were able to part on decent terms. But ultimately, being in that moment, even though I was technically on the side of certainty where I'm like, I am certain I'm going to have this bank telling job and this isn't where I want to be. But then all of a sudden to have that moment where all of a sudden it's like this accounting position worked out. That was the accounting firm I ended up going to work for. And all I have to say is all the worrying, all the concern, all the doubt, all the anxiety, all of it. I had so many sleepless nights because of being on that side of uncertainty. And now at 29, I think about that moment. And that happened to me when I was about like 23 or so at the time when all of that took place. So about 6 years ago now. I just remember thinking, I wish I was more gracious. Like I wish I was more relaxed. And so now at 29, I look at life and I'm just like, everything can change on a dime. Things I was so certain of changed so quickly. I was certain I was going to work at a bank. And then all of a sudden an opportunity arose where I didn't have to work at that bank. I ended up getting to have the job that I wanted, which was incredible. And even the best part in all of that I had learned is I had started to learn this concept of intentionality, which is something I'm still always striving towards, is wanting to be intentional, wanting to really know what it is that I want. And something that I always came back to is no matter what I was doing, I always really cared about business. I always really wanted to be more invested in what was going on. How did things get done? I really wanted to understand the operational aspect of everything. And the best part of all of this is because I had gotten that accounting job, it had actually launched me into being able to do every other job I've done after that. I wouldn't have gotten my opportunity in working a startup if I didn't first work at that accounting firm. It laid the foundations for so many points in my life. And so that's why I always say, you go from this moment of uncertainty and then somehow you land in this moment of certainty. And all that changed was one moment. And ultimately, what happens when we don't have peace between the uncertainty and the certainty of things in life, what happens is it's almost like we put on these weighted vests on ourselves. It's so funny. I look at a lot of people on TikTok or YouTube, and whenever they're talking about working out, a very popular thing I've been seeing recently is runners putting on weighted vests. So as they run, it's like it's helping them with endurance and breathing and just all these different things. And that I feel like is a beautiful metaphor or representation of life where it's like those fears, that anxiety, those doubts, it's like this vest we put on ourselves and it's weighted. And then we're the ones that like we strap it on and we make it so tight where it's like the tightness, it's the timelines, it's the expectations. And then we're running this race. And sometimes the race that we're running isn't even a race that we want to run. It's a race that we were told to run. And so there's been moments even in my life where I've held so tightly onto these weighted vests, these things in my life where I'm like, it's not going to get better. Like I didn't want to let go. I didn't want to say no to the bank teller job because I didn't think something better was going to come along. I didn't think the accounting firm was going to come along. So I held on to it. I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do because it was what seemed right in the moment. And then all of a sudden, this accounting opportunity comes along. And even in that email, if they said, are you still available? If I said no, because I was so busy holding on to the bank telling job, I would have missed out on that beautiful opportunity of working there. And that opportunity launched me into so many other amazing opportunities. And it's the same thing even with life, even with love. It's so funny. I even talked about some of these ideas in Silent Surrender, where it's like, it's the art of letting go. There's moments in your life where you have those like situationships where it's like nothing's ever clearly defined, where it's like we talk and nothing ever happens. And it's moments like that, or you have the relationship where it's like we're on again, we're off again. But the thing is, you're so tightly holding on to those things. And then all that ends up happening is you miss out on something so much better for you because you're holding on to those things. And once again, it goes back to that idea of, like I said, with intentionality. And it even goes back to in other episodes where I believe it was our episode from Thanksgiving, where I was talking about if someone actually cares for you and actually likes you and wants to get to know you, there's intentionality behind it. It looks like something. And so that's what this looks like, where it's like going from uncertainty to certainty. And ultimately, if you want to have peace within it, brings it back to this question of what is it that you actually want? What are the things that actually make you come alive? There's so many times in life where people will tell me, hey, I think you would be a really great teacher. You should go to school, get a degree, and work in a high school, middle school, elementary school. That's what you should do. I've had other people say you would be great in sales. And you know what? When someone says you'd be a great teacher, there's nothing I value more than teachers. I think it's a incredibly important role, especially in the world that we live in and especially with our youth. Now, but the thing is, when I stop and I picture my life, yes, I enjoy teaching, but I don't know if that's something I could see myself doing. I don't know if I could see myself standing in a classroom, talking to kids all day long. But as soon as someone says, oh, well, you could be like a trainer in a business environment, that's where I'm like, oh, that sounds really exciting to me. And so that's the thing where when we look at life, what might work for one person doesn't work for another person. And it goes back to you have to know what the things are that make you come alive as an individual. And what we lose the plot on is finding enjoyment in what we're doing. It's so much easier to work at something when you find enjoyment in what you're doing than to do something that you absolutely hate. And trust me, I've had jobs where I've absolutely hated it. And then I've had jobs where I've really enjoyed doing what I was doing. And then obviously you have these moments in life where life throws you curveballs because like I said, sometimes it's one moment that changes the course of everything. I've had crazy moments in my life change the entire direction that I was going in. A perfect example is COVID. I was working in a retail store and I just remember working and it was like I was getting to this point of being so burnt out. I just remember thinking like, man, sometimes like I wish the whole world could just stop for a moment. And it's almost like I could get my bearings straight. And literally the next week, my entire store got shut down and everyone was furloughed. So we were laid off. And I was on unemployment and the whole world basically shut down because of COVID. And I remember thinking, never in my wildest dreams, as much as I was like, I wish the whole world would stop. You say things, but you don't actually think those things are going to happen. I just remember getting the call from my store manager and they're like, oh yeah, like were temporarily shut down for like the next week. Next thing I knew, once that week was done, we were shut down for like a month and a half. And so by the time I ended up going back to the retail store, I realized I was like, I don't even want to be in retail anymore. And what happened was that whole shift actually set me up perfectly to transition out of working from retail and to move into other career opportunities. And it was even the same thing when I was working at a startup. I was really enjoying where I was at. There was even moments in my life where I was like, I'm going to be here for at least 5 years. This is what I want to accomplish. These are the things that I want to do. And honestly, kind of like in any career, any job that you have, it's like as an individual person, you have certain boundaries where you're like, well, if this happens, like it could be something as simple as like, you know how sometimes you could have stupid things where you're like, well, if this person gets promoted over me, like I would leave. And it could be things like that. That wasn't the case for me. But there's certain boundaries where you're like, if A, B, or C happens, then I'm leaving. And that's exactly what ended up happening when I decided I wanted to leave working at the startup. This was something where I was like, I wanted to be here for 5 years. I wanted to accomplish certain things. I wanted to get myself set up and ready to move into other career opportunities. But then it was like all these stars started to align where I was like, well, I always said if this happened, I would consider leaving. And then if B happened, I would consider leaving too. And next thing you know, it was like I had 3 things on this list and every single one of them slowly started to happen all within the course of like a month and a half. And I was like, okay, like anytime I ever kind of doubted or considered, should I actually be leaving? One of the 3 things would happen. And I was like, okay, this was a fundamental like boundary that I told myself, if these things happened, it's not worth it. There's a million other places to work. I could get another opportunity. But this isn't right. And you got to remember, these boundaries, they're not trivial things. They're really important where it's like, okay, if I'm being disrespected, like how much disrespect, how much abuse do you want to take until finally you're like, okay, I think I should probably leave, and like I use all of those as examples, but you have to find where are your lines in the sand that you're like, when this is crossed, this is not something I want to put up with. And every person has different standards, and that's perfectly fine. You just have to know what works for you. And so, like I said, for me, it was like A, B, and C. They all eventually got to this point where I was like, how do I stay? And that ultimately goes back to the one moment theory, where you're in this moment of uncertainty, where you're like, if I leave, I'm not guaranteed another opportunity. If I give this up, if I leave my financially stable job to start a podcast, there's no certainty this is going to pan out. And that is ultimately the question you have to reckon with yourself, is to go from one certainty to an uncertainty, you have to have faith. And so for me, it was going from this financial security, which was the certainty I had in my life, and then making a massive jump, massive pivot, whatever you want to call it, and jumping into uncertainty and starting a podcast. There was no certainty that no matter how much money I had saved up, no matter what I decided to talk about, there was no certainty this was going to pan out. And there's still always uncertainty about if something's going to pan out. Even perfect examples, even if you stay with the financial security, there's no certainty that the business that you're working at doesn't go bankrupt. There's no certainty that all of a sudden, whatever industry you're in, all of a sudden it becomes irrelevant. Even when you think you have certainty, there is no certainty. All that you can have is having peace. Peace that things are always changing and things are always evolving. And the problem is we are so easy as people to focus on what's so bad and what's so negative. Why would I leave financial security, pivot into something of uncertainty like starting a podcast? It may not pan out. But if someone told you in 6 months it was going to pan out, would you do it? Oh, well, of course I would do it. Right. But what if I told you it was going to take you a year? What if I told you it was going to take 5 years? The thing is, we're always willing to do things when we know there's certainty. We're not willing to do things when there's uncertainty. But the beauty of life is in the uncertainty. And it's the very thing with one moment. The best moments in your life are the moments that you can't plan. They're the moments that just happen on a whim. I love the movie The Holiday with Cameron Diaz, and I'm totally going to butcher. It's Kate Winslet. Yes, Kate Winslet. Okay, I said her name correctly. But I love the movie The Holiday. So you have Cameron Diaz, Kate Winslet, and how both their characters, they both have their own plans. They're both going to celebrate Christmas in their respective countries and different things like that. So Cameron Diaz's character, Amanda, Kate Winslet's character, Iris. Amanda plans on being with her partner. And meanwhile, Iris is pining after the guy that she's liked. And both girls end up facing these major moments of like disappointment where all of a sudden Amanda's relationship falls flat on its face and Iris finds out that the guy that she's been in love with is engaged to another woman. And so what do? They both have these crazy moments where it's like, I have to get outside of my box. I have to change what is going on. And so they end up switching houses. Iris, who lives in England, decides she's going to go to California. Amanda, who lives in California, decides she's going to go to England. But if they had never switched places, if they had never switched houses, they would have never met their potential love interests. And that is something to me that I always find so interesting. It even makes me think of the movie Serendipity, where it goes back to this, like these chance encounters, but it's like, how much of it is chance? And how much is it just kind of like these invisible strings that are always pulling us and putting us together? That it's like, what are the odds? And that is something where, as a person, I don't believe in coincidence. I think people put a lot of emphasis on luck. And I don't know if people are that lucky. I think there's a much bigger plan to everything all the time. I think there are invisible strings that pull us all together, that align us. What are the odds that two girls would just randomly decide to switch houses for the holiday and they both end up finding a perfect fit in each other's opposite life, And I think that's something that's really beautiful. So bringing this back to really our one moment, and I'm going to call it the one moment theory, but bringing us back to the one moment theory, it's a state of mind. It provides you peace in the moment, knowing everything can change on a dime. So I had a colleague ask me one time when I was working within the startup, and we always were adding new products, and that would create different complications. And I remember the colleague had said something like, "Oh, are you ready for if they do this?" I had said, "Listen, I'm ready for nothing, but I'm prepared for everything." That is the mindset behind the one moment theory. I'm ready for nothing, but prepared for everything. You can't plan everything to a T, but you can be ready for life to throw you curveballs. And ultimately, the moment that you allow yourself to rest and knowing everything can change at any point, you'll have peace. And I say that having learned the hard way, I have been known to be a control freak. I've had family members say, my mom, she's like, "Oh, Christina, she's a control freak. Trust me." And I'll be the first to admit it. It's true. It is. Ultimately, if you want this theory to work for you, it's about saying yes to the right things, and it's okay to say no to the things that don't suit you either. I'm not saying that you say no to everything, and I'm not saying to say yes to everything. You have to say yes to the right things, and it goes back to intentionality. What is it that you want? The moment that you start to know what it is that you want, you know what to say yes to, and you know what to say no to. So if you're someone that you want to work in business, when someone says, "Hey, do you want to be an art teacher?" It's very clear to see that's potentially not going to work for you because you want to work in business. So when you're going to make decisions, the best way to make decisions is you have to drop fear. So let go of your weighted vest of fear because you can't make a clear-minded decision when you're under distress. All that ends up happening is your fight, flight, or freeze kicks in, your panic responses. So the moment that you're able to cut fear out, you're able to be intentional with where you want to go, you'll find peace. You'll find peace within the chaos, ultimately. So closing out our discussion on one moment, when I think about the concept of one moment and how quickly everything can change just in a single moment. And like I said, I told you throughout this episode, there's been lots of moments in my life where I've gone from one polar dynamic opposite to the next polar dynamic opposite. But one of my favorite quotes is from Bill Gates when he goes, "Most people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. And I know reading that quote, it kind of sounds like, what does that have to do with anything? But it goes back to this one moment theory where we overestimate the things that can be done in a year. Like sometimes there's some people when you talk to them, it's like, I'm going to get married, I'm going to have a baby, and I'm going to build a house this year. Maybe you could do all of that. That sounds like a lot of stuff that needs to happen in the time span of 1 year. But what we underestimate is how we can do those things within a decade. And where it's like, oh, you could easily get married, have a kid, and build a house within 10 years because it's not like you're running a marathon every single day. That type of thing. It goes back to that same idea of how everything can change so quickly all in one moment, where it's like you go from not knowing the greatest love of your life to boom, you know them in the next moment. You go from not being pregnant to being pregnant. You go from not having a house to all of a sudden you're signing a deed for a house. That is how quickly everything can change. But it doesn't always have to happen all at once. It can happen all at once, but it doesn't always have to. And on top of it, do you want everything to happen all at once? I think there's something really beautiful in getting to really cherish every moment as everything happens. So now that we're going to call this the one moment theory, this is how I would summarize it. It's not doing nothing. It's about doing all you know what to do and having peace in the midst. When you set a GPS to give you directions to a location, usually you hold onto peace. It's going to get you there, either on time, early, or late. You know it will get you there. So between putting the directions on and starting to drive, what do you do? Me? I usually put music on because I want to enjoy the ride. But you know what also happens while I listen? The music gets quieter so I can hear the directions, so I know when to turn. If I miss a turn, I get rerouted. It may add time to the arrival estimate, but I still get there. So all in all it takes is one moment to change everything. That is what I want you to think about. All it takes is one moment that can change everything. Boom. That is my Spark Notes. That is my summary. Hold on to all of that. And for any of the naysayers out there, it's so easy to think about the worst case possible. Let's spin it around and think about the best case possible. It's so easy to be negative. It's so much harder to be positive. So thank you so much for hanging out with me. And this one moment theory conversation, however you want to call it, was something that was really near and dear to my heart. And it was probably the best Christmas present I could ever give to you. So again, thank you. I greatly appreciate your time. And Merry Christmas to all of you out there. And I hope you have a wonderful holiday. And I will have another new episode for you next week on New Year's Day. So if you're curious about that, we'll keep the streak alive. Anyways, so I'd love to connect with you more. You can connect with us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Let's Unravel Podcast. If you enjoyed this week's show or the podcast show in general, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and now Facebook. Your comments and 5-star ratings go a very long way. And please don't forget to hit that subscribe or follow button wherever you might listen to stay up to date on all new episodes. We release new episodes every single Thursday, and you are not going to want to miss a thing. Well, I guess it's that time of the episode to tell you my answer to the hot take. Is The Polar Express a creepy movie that we have just normalized? Yes, The Polar Express is in fact a very creepy movie if you think about it. They wake children up in the middle of the night. They take them, they put them on a train, they bring them all the way to Santa Claus. They're exposed to everything that happens in the North Pole. They're dropped back off, but they're told not to tell their parents and only they can hear a special whistle. It's creepy. We've normalized it. I'm saying this as someone who genuinely enjoyed The Polar Express. I really loved that movie growing up. And then you get older and somewhere along the way, it stops being magical and it just kind of gets creepy. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Well, that's all. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll talk to you guys next week. And Merry Christmas. Bye.